This video will look at net present value and present value index. Present value is one of the more difficult concepts for a lot of students, so I'm going to start by explaining what present value itself means. Present value is the amount that you would need to invest today at a specific rate of interest in order to have the desired amount at a future date. So in other words, if you know that in 5 years you're going to need $1,000, and if you know the interest rate you can invest is 8% interest, how much do you need to put in the bank today if it's going to get 8% interest compounded yearly? How much will you need to put in today in order to have your $1,000 5 years from now? Financial calculators can calculate present value for you, and when you take a later class in finance, you'll be using those. But for this, we're going to use something called a present value table. And you'll find these tables in your book, in the back of the book, and in your chapter. But this is just a sample present value table. So in the example that I gave below, if we know we're going to need $1,000 in 5 years and we think we can get 8%, how much do we need now? Well, we can find the rate at the top of the table. So right here's 8%, and we know that we are going to have 5 years for it to compound interest. So this is our number of years, 5, and when we find on the table where there's to meet 0.681, you would multiply that times the amount you need, and 0.681 times 1,000, you would need $681 invested today at 8% compounded annually in order to have 1,000 5 years from now. So the present value of $1,000 to be received 5 years from now at 8% is $681. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about present value. The net present value of cash flows tells you what is the present value of all of the cash that we're investing. So there's a method that you use to get that. Using the present value table, you determine the present value of the net cash flow for each year of the investment. Then you add all those values together to determine the total present value of cash flows, and you subtract the amount of the original investment to determine the net present value. Looking at a sample problem, if we have an investment that costs $126,000 and it has net cash flows, and again we're talking about net cash flows and not net income. Year 1, $65,000, year 2, $56,000, year 3, $42,000, and year 4, $25,000. Assuming that the company desires a 15% return, what is the net present value and the present value index? We're going to first have to know the present value factor for each year. So if I go back to this table, and we'll go back a couple of slides and look at the table. Sorry. So if I look at the table for 15%, the amount that I'm going to get in year 1, I'm going to multiply by 0.870. The amount I'm going to get in year 2, I'm going to multiply by 0.756. The amount I'm going to get in year 3, 0.658, and year 4, 0.572. So that's the amounts that I've filled in here. This is the amount of my net cash flows. You multiply them together to get your present value of the cash flows for that particular year. Adding all 4 of these together gives me $140,822, which is my total present value of cash flows. I subtract from that the original investment of $126,000, and the net present value is $14,822. The positive net present value indicates that this project returned more than the required 15%. If it had been a negative net present value, it would mean that the project did not return the required 15%. It wouldn't mean that we lost money on this project. It would just mean that we didn't make 15% on this project. Present value index takes it one step further by dividing the present value by the original investment. So if we go back to the previous problem, the total present value is $140,822. The original investment is $126,000. If I divide those, I get 1.12. An index of less than 1 indicates a project with a lower than desired return, and an index of greater than 1 indicates a project with a higher than desired return. So this present value of 1.12 indicates, again, that we made more than 15%, or we would make more than 15% on this project. The present value index is particularly useful if you have projects that have unequal investments. It gives you a more accurate way of comparing them than the net present value.